Chapter 2. The Navy at Peace. A letter came from the Secretary of the Admiralty dated 14th of April 1930 to Cadet S.R. Lombard-Hobson, Royal Navy. The Lords Commissioners of the Admiralty hereby appoint you Naval Cadet of His Majesty's ship, Queen Elizabeth, and direct you to repair on board that ship at Portsmouth on 7th of May 1930. By command of their Lordships, O. Murray. The great ship Queen Elizabeth was, of course, flagship of Vice Admiral Sir David Beatty, who led the first battle squadron into action at the Battle of Jutland in 1916. It was in the Admiral's cabin of this very ship at Rosyth on 16th November 1918 that the surrender of the German High Seas Fleet was received and signed. QE, as she was known to everyone, had just completed a long refit of modernisation and had been fitted with a new, vast, truncated funnel which made her conspicuous and even more formidable looking. She was secured alongside a railway jetty, a short step from the dry dock in which HMS Victory, flagship of Lord Nelson at the Battle of Trafalgar, is preserved in perpetuity. At 0800 on the 27th of May 1930, the flag of Admiral Sir Ernest Chatfield was hoisted in HMS Queen Elizabeth. The new Commander-in-Chief, Mediterranean, then saluted the flag of Admiral of the Fleet Sir Roger Keyes, Commander-in-Chief Portsmouth, in HMS Victory with 19 guns. 2 hours later, Admiral Chatfield, in the green barge with shining brass funnel, came alongside his new flagship. As he mounted the ladder and was piped aboard, the band struck up Rule Britannia, the musical salute appropriate to a Commander-in-Chief. After he had inspected the Royal Marines Guard, the officers were presented to him on the quarterdeck, and the ship prepared for sea. At 1100 hours, QE slipped from the jetty and proceeded out of harbour. Each ship that was passed cleared lower deck and gave 3 cheers. Amongst these were the battleship Emperor of India and the aircraft carriers Ark Royal, Glorious, and Furious. Flying from the yardarm of the ships in harbour was the flag signal, Bon voyage and good luck. On the way down the English Channel, we met the German liner Bremen, SS Olympic bound for the United States, and SS Majestic. Each of these great passenger ships dipped their ensign to us in salute. As we passed the Rock of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean, we could see the flash from the guns as the fortress fired a 17-gun salute to its new Commander-in-Chief. Off the Tunisian coast, we sighted what looked like a small cloud approaching. As it came closer, the sky became overcast and the sun was obscured. We soon realised that we were witnessing the phenomenon of a storm of locusts at sea. As though by a given signal, the large insects descended on the ship, with a noise that deadened the roar of the ship's boilers, and in no time, their struggling bodies covered every flat surface from stem to stern. Any man caught on deck when the storm broke soon had the inside of his shirt and trousers crawling with fat, grasshopper-like creatures. Looking down from the bridge, it was impossible to see any bare space on the deck below. Officer of the watch, turn into the wind and clear the ship of locusts, ordered Captain R.C. Davenport. At once, boatswain's mates were piping round the mess decks, all hands on deck with the buckets and shovels. Swarms had penetrated inside the ship, down ventilators and through doors and skylights. Millions must have been sucked into the forced draft intakes to the boilers and down the funnel, to be roasted alive. It took half an hour of sweeping and shovelling before fire hoses were brought to bear on the insects. The flagship entered Grand Harbour Valletta at 0800 on the 5th of June, and joined the formidable gathering of warships displaying Britain's naval might as leading sea power of the world. It is indeed the strength of the British presence in the Mediterranean that stands out as the strongest impression in my memory of the early 30s. We had military garrisons at both ends, Gibraltar and Egypt, and between them, 1,000 miles from each, the immensely powerful Mediterranean fleet, based on the fortress of Malta. Peace and quiet reigned everywhere. Any local troubles that blew up were quickly stopped by the timely arrival of one of His Majesty's ships. Officers and men could go anywhere they liked for the asking, and were always made welcome. Cruises arranged by the Commander-in-Chief took us to all corners of the Middle Sea, which presumptuously, though understandably, the Royal Navy regarded as Mare Nostrum. The cruise year was divided into 3 parts. The spring saw the fleet based on Gibraltar for the annual big get-together with ships of the Atlantic Fleet. This started with a major combined exercise to the westward, lasting for a week. New tactics and battle formations devised by the tactical school at home were tried out at sea under winter conditions, and the results, with recommendations, passed back to the Admiralty for analysis after a 2-day wash-up conference at Gibraltar. Ships then scattered to various ports in the western Mediterranean for 2 months before returning to Malta. The summer cruise was generally spent amongst the islands and harbours of the Adriatic and Aegean, places now well known to the tourist, but, in those days, largely unheard of by people at home. This cruise commenced with a major tactical exercise, followed by the annual pudding regatta and individual ship drills. The autumn cruise, lasting some 2.5 months, saw the fleet split up into units, visiting places of interest in the eastern Mediterranean. Before that, a remote Greek anchorage was chosen, in which the whole fleet would assemble for the annual sailing regatta. Again, no opportunity was missed on passage to carry out tactical, gunnery and torpedo firing exercises between ships. After serving at sea for a few months, depending on the certificate awarded on passing out of the RN College, cadets were promoted midshipmen. In this humble, non-commissioned rank you had, as it were, the best and the worst of both worlds. You were an officer, and you lived as such, but you were kicked around for the greater part of this time in a manner which the young rating would never be expected to tolerate. The great merit derived from this time spent as midshipman was that you were closer to the men on the lower deck than at any other period in your service career. They knew that you were under training, that you were subject to a form of discipline at the hands of your brother officers, far severer than anything that came their way, and because of this, they are on your side, and would help you whenever you made a mistake or got into trouble. By the same token, you learned a lot about the ratings and their problems. They confided in you, and discussed matters troubling them which, in all probability, they would not divulge to a commissioned officer. You certainly discovered from them which wardroom officers were popular on the lower deck, and those who were not. Midshipmen did not have cabins. You kept your clothes in an old-fashioned sea chest, 3 decks down but below the waterline. It was not easy to appear smart on watch, or properly dressed for any occasion, when you had no space to hang anything, nor to dry your uniform if you got soaking on deck or in a boat. Bed was a hammock which had to be lashed up and stowed every morning. The problem at night was to find somewhere to sling, where you would not be disturbed. The midshipman's chest flat compartment would accommodate about half the gunroom officers. The others had to find a sleeping billet in one of the cabin flats. If you could not find a place for your hammock clear of a steam pipe, you probably had to put up with a fixed police light within 2 feet of your face. When the ship rolled in the beam sea, the movement of this light made you feel sick. In summer, I always slept on the quarterdeck under the barbette of the after 15-inch gun turret, but I had to be quick off the mark if I wished to avoid a hosing when hands started to scrub down at 0540 in the morning. "Sorry, sir," would be the gleeful apology. "Didn't know you had the middle watch last night and was sleeping late." One early morning, I was sent aft to tell the first lieutenant that the ship was shortened into 3 cables and the anchor ready for weighing. Wearing my forecastle rig of oilskins and heavy sea boots, I entered the wardroom to make my report. The first lieutenant was finishing a plate of fried eggs and bacon before going forward. He took one look at me and roared, "Never come into the mess in those bloody awful boots. Get out and go up on the main lower mast platform. I'll tell you when you can come down." I climbed aloft with alacrity because I had no fear of heights and anyhow would not have to fall in for leaving harbour. After I had been up at the mast for about an hour, I began to feel very cold. To make my plight worse, the ship was steaming into the wind, and I was looking down into the funnel, belching fumes into my face. At stand easy time, 10:30, my hands were getting so cold that I might not have been able to hold on to the ladder to come down, so I descended and entered the wardroom, this time in bare feet, to ask permission of the first lieutenant to come down. The mess was crowded with officers drinking coffee. As though by given signal, they all rounded on me and shouted, "Get out!" I did not realise that my face was completely black with soot, and worse, having removed my boots to climb the mast, that my black footprints were all over the grey carpet. Before the commander could lynch me, a very worried-looking first lieutenant came to my rescue and said, "Thank God you came down. I'd forgotten all about you." His name was Lieutenant Commander H.M. Denham, a great seaman, yachtsman and author, and, later, as British Naval Attaché Stockholm, the leading figure in one of the epics of the naval war to come. There was one practice carried out as a form of initiation of the young gentlemen on their first coming to sea, which I thought, or rather think, was barbaric and very foolish. I refer to the baptism of gunfire by night, from a very exposed position. My group of cadets was made to fall in on the wings of the flag deck, just below the bridge, during QE's first full-caliber night shoot. The flash and the roar of twin 15-inch guns at close quarters is actually more frightening than ear-splitting. The noise, however, is considerable, and I quickly picked up a piece of cotton waste, smelling of bluebell, and stuffed it into my ears, only to have it forcibly snatched out by the duty gunner's mate before the next broadside was fired. Quite the best of the many jobs that fell within the competence of a midshipman was the running of one of the two fast picket boats carried by a battleship. These 45-foot steam-driven craft had a crew of 6 and a carrying capacity of 60 men. There were normally midshipmen in charge of all the larger power and sailing boats, but the lucky ones were selected to run the picket boats. I was appointed to one fairly early on in my time. If you had the feel for handling one of these powerful single-screw boats and looked after it well, you could be left to get on with it for months. If, however, you made a habit of smashing up the ship's gangways, you soon found yourself back on deck as a watchkeeper. I found that the experience I had gained at Dartmouth messing about in boats, in preference to playing football, paid me handsome dividends. I loved my picket boat, and used to spend half an hour in the boat each day before breakfast helping the crew to clean the brightwork, thereby avoiding physical training on the quarterdeck. I knew that I had the newest and fastest picket boat in the fleet. I was not going to lose it to another midshipman. One Sunday evening in Malta, after my boat had been moored up for the night, and I was watching a Charlie Chaplin film on the quarterdeck from the comfort of an armchair, I heard the pipe. "Away, first picket boat's crew." It could only be an emergency. I flew along to the officer of the watch to be told that a Libertyman had missed the last canteen boat and had to be fetched from the far side of the Grand Harbour. I was furious, as were the rest of my crew. We roughly handled the offender into the forepeak of the boat and set out on the return journey. Not wishing to miss more of the film than necessary, I ordered down the voice pipe to the stoker petty officer. "Open her up, Stokes." The boat raced across the harbour. We dodged mooring buoys and slipped under the stern of other boats going about their business. Suddenly, one of my bowmen shouted, "Gazer right ahead, sir." I spun the wheel to starboard and stopped engine, but too late. We hit the gazer. This is a gondola-type boat. Amidships, the fore end passing down our port side, its after end down the other. The 2 oarsmen were flung into the water, as were the 3 Libertymen from HMS Royal Oak returning to their ship. We picked up the seamen, and 1 Maltese only. Search of the area for an hour by orders light revealed no trace of the other boatman. I returned to the QE and reported the incident. Next morning, I had to make a written report for the captain to send to the water police. At the inquiry held on board, one of the Royal Oak seamen said that the gazer were not carrying a light because, being absentees, the Libertymen had covered the boat's lantern with a cap so as to get back to their ship unseen. That saved me. The captain said that while I might not be charged with manslaughter in the civil courts, I must nevertheless have been driving too fast. He sentenced me to remain on board until after the coroner's inquest, and, in the meantime, to learn the Maltese language, so that I could go to the missing gazerman's home in person and apologise to his next of kin. The body was never recovered, and the coroner withheld his verdict for 6 weeks. During this time, I had learned enough of the simple Arabic-based Maltese language to conduct a full burial service. In due course, I set out on my mission, and with difficulty found the deceased home in the back streets of Valletta, carrying a suitable bunch of flowers. I entered and said my piece. I was expecting either floods of tears or angry scenes from the family, of which there seemed to be at least a dozen, but to my surprise, I was welcomed. They said that Joe had never been a good husband or father and was lazy, and that 1 less mouth to feed in the family meant more for the others. The end to the affair was that the ship's canteen committee voted a sum of money for the deceased family, to which, of course, I subscribed, as did the Royal Oak seamen. The start of the spring cruise during my second year in the Mediterranean witnessed a collision between a British warship and a French liner, which became the subject of an action in the High Court of Justice lasting nearly 2 years. In the afternoon of 1st of April, 1931, the aircraft carrier Glorious, in which I was doing a short flying course, was stationed some miles ahead of the battle fleet, and had flown off 2 squadrons of torpedo bombers and fighter aircraft. The sea was flat calm, and the visibility at maximum. At a distance to the southward, the luxury liner Florida was travelling on a similar course and at a speed in excess of ours. Suddenly, a fog developed, described in the report of the proceedings as like a high, white cliff across a line of advance of the fleet. Glorious had 27 aircraft in the air with limited endurance. To recover them, the carrier required a minimum wind speed over the flight deck of 20 knots. She endeavoured to manoeuvre clear of the fog bank, and the Florida steered to avoid entering it. The Glorious struck the Florida on the port side, unfortunately, and penetrated 62 feet into the liner's third-class dining saloon, where passengers were having tea. There was very considerable loss of life. The Glorious suffered severe damage and had her bows folded back a distance of 50 feet. Had the angle of impact been broader, the liner would have been cut in two and sunk immediately. The two ships remained locked together while the 700 surviving passengers and crew of the Florida crossed over to safety on board the Glorious. When it was seen that neither ship was in danger of sinking, seamen from the carrier and a few French crewmen boarded the liner to prepare her for tow. With great difficulty, the Glorious towed the crippled vessel stern first to Malaga, where she was beached. Concurrently, with us having to contend with a major disaster at sea, the captain of the Glorious, Captain C.E. Kennedy Purvis, had to decide what to do with his aircraft and 70 crewmen in the air. The torpedo bombers were ordered to make for Spain, where they landed safely, with the exception of 4 which crash-landed in the sea. The crews were picked up by destroyers. The fighter aircraft, unable to reach land, were told to ditch alongside the nearest destroyer, which recovered the pilots without loss. In the Spanish press, it was reported that the first person to cross to safety from the liner after collision was the master, followed by his bridge staff, and later, that Florida's crew members, who had returned to assist with towing arrangements, ransacked passengers' cabins of all their valuables. Gossip ashore also had it that Glorious's sailors showed excess in zeal in caring for certain French passengers while on board the carrier, and I can guess which. Trust Jack not to miss a chance. Costs of the case were equally divided between the Admiralty and Transport Maritime of Marseille, the Florida's owners. Captain Kennedy Purvis was commended for his conduct, both at the time of the collision and during the difficult operation of towing a damaged liner backwards through the night. The Commander-in-Chief sent a party of officers and men from the fleet to Malaga to attend the funeral of the French passengers killed in the collision. The Queen Elizabeth paid a visit to Haifa during the autumn cruise of 1930, where weekend leave was granted. I was one of a group of midshipmen which went to stay with the Northamptonshire Regiment quartered in Jerusalem, where we were shown all the sights. On our return, and shortly before the ship was due to leave Haifa, I noticed that the sea chest next to mine in the midshipman's flat had not been opened. I accordingly reported that Midshipman Gray, who was with us in Palestine, had not returned on board. A signal was sent alerting all Levant consular authorities to keep a lookout for the absentee officer. The QE, meanwhile, continued her cruise to ports in Cyprus, Turkey, Rhodes and Greece before returning to Malta. In late November, the missing midshipman was brought back to the ship under escort. He had clearly had a rough time. A court of inquiry was held, and it was revealed that Gray had gone to the recruiting office in Beirut and enlisted in the French Foreign Legion. He told the court that life in the Royal Navy was devoid of adventure, and that he found endless dressing up and watchkeeping intolerably dull. He had only given himself up because a few weeks in the Legion had proved to be hell beyond description, even worse than the Navy. Captain Davenport preferred a charge of desertion and asked for a court-martial to be convened. The Commander-in-Chief refused. He ordered that Midshipman Gray be summarily punished on board, with deprivation of 3 months' seniority and rank. The Admiral argued that it took courage to do what Gray had done, and that the Navy could not afford to lose an officer of his potential. Back on board, the short-time recruit would say nothing of his adventures, nor how he managed to escape, once admitted to the Foreign Legion for life. The captain, and 1 or 2 older wardroom officers, saw the errant midshipman as little better than a criminal, and treated him as such. Others, more broad-minded, made light of what they regarded as a youthful escapade, while in the gunroom, Gray was welcomed back as something of a hero. Admiral Chatfield's judgment was, however, to be vindicated, because Midshipman G.T.S. Gray served in command of destroyers in the war and was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. When he retired from the Royal Navy in 1965, he was a Rear Admiral and a Companion of the Order of the Bath.